Hi, so I'm going to talk a bit about what you already know in terms of Chuuk, but also some of the sites here in Guam. And I guess the theme is management for whom and how we do that sort of management and for whom. So you've seen this map. Guam has quite a few black dots around it, and Chuuk Lagoon has even more black dots in and around it. This interesting to note that out of these 3,800, 4,000 in World War II, there are about 330 tankers, potentially, full of oil, or some with, potentially anyway, with a lot of oil in them. So shipwrecks in Chuuk Lagoon, I've documented 52 shipwrecks in Chuuk Lagoon, and they range from, you can see here, whether you can read transport, the 51%, the blue, tankers, submarine chasers, destroyers, Picket Island, transport, submarines, and so on. So a large percentage of them are the transport or merchant ships pressed into service. And a great shot from John Riley, who passed away now, but San Francisco Maru, 55 metres with one of the midget tanks on it. So it has a huge range of terrific sites to dive, and tourism in Chuuk is all about diving. It's all about diving on these shipwrecks and other sort of World War II sites. And therefore, unfortunately, people that dive there as tourists don't get to see or to understand about the society, the culture from indigenous people of Chuuk. For instance, if you dive using one of the liverboards, you'll get picked up at the airport, you'll get taken down to the Blue Lagoon, you'll get put on the liverboard boat, the Odyssey or something like that. You'll spend your week on the Odyssey, you'll come back for a day on shore, you won't leave Blue Lagoon, then you'll go back to the airport, and you've not seen any of Chuuk, the people, the place. You've just seen some fantastic dive sites, but there's no background, there's no indigenous background to it all. And this is, I guess, my theme that I sort of look at in my work and in this presentation. What a lot of people know about Chuuk is that it was the Imperial Japanese Navy base for a couple of years. It had the two biggest battleships of the war, the Yamato and Musashi, 70,000 tons there for a couple of years. When attacked in '44, these ships and most of the Navy ships had left and gone to Palau because there was a warning by a spotter plane from the US 10 days before. So the US Navy, in a huge operation, the Task Force 58, including 4 large aircraft carriers and this range of ships, you can imagine the ships anchored or were offshore and just sent wave after wave after wave of aircraft in. 3,500 sorties came in on those 2 dates there, February and April, May. That's 10 times the number of sorties that the Japanese used in Pearl Harbor. So a lot of bombing and a lot of destruction. The British Navy actually came in late in the episode to practice a bit, unfortunately for I guess local people. They were continually bombed for no other reason than just to practice bombing. But in my work in Chuuk, I found that there were about 112 ships sunk in and around Chuuk. So of the 52 documented, there are many more, and quite a few outside that haven't been found. And many of them are these types of ships down the bottom. These are 2 of the ships that are wrecked, the Hita Maru and the Kayasumi Maru. And they actually did consider dropping an atomic bomb on Chuuk in June '44. But by that time, they found that conventional warfare had sort of decimated the fleet. And fortunately, for local people again, this didn't happen. During the sort of build-up and the warfare, especially the February '44 episode, the Navy, the Army came in and really therefore spent a lot of time in defending or getting the sort of facilities for the defence of the lagoon. And in that sort of process, they pressed local people into sort of slave labour in pushing guns up the hill, digging caves to put the guns in. And when I did my survey there of the underwater sites, I wanted to look about how local people thought about the local sites in comparison with terrestrial sites. And they found the terrestrial sites, because of that connection with people, that there was much more sense of belonging to those terrestrial World War II sites as compared to the underwater sites, where there was no really sense of belonging. Not, as far as I know, not many people that were killed during that sort of bombing time in February and May 44. So I guess after the war, Cousteau came to Chuuk in '69, recovered tons of artefacts apparently, and produced a film. Then legislation came in 1971 to try and curb the looting and also to control what sort of diving was, and therefore developed a fee for diving there. It's now up to $50 a year for diving in Chuuk. But such was that the Americans, they saw the bombing of Chuuk as a payback to Pearl Harbor, that they put it onto the Register of National Historic Places. Then they proclaimed it as a National Historic Landmark, and it's only one of 5 National Historic Landmarks in Micronesia, the others being Madol and some in Sierra. The nomination for the National Historic Landmark in particular focused on the historic significance of the Japanese shipwrecks and aircraft and their destruction by the US Navy, and how the legendary and vulnerable truck was destroyed, opening a way into the Marianas. But they didn't talk about how it impacted local people. There was no mention, because I've seen the paperwork in this nomination, there was nothing mentioning Chuukese in this sort of nomination process. And later, as time's gone on, there's been quite a lot of looting, and the US have given this a threatened status, and on their website they laid the blame on this looting on local people. And you might be sort of now seeing the sort of theme I'm trying to build up. Who is to blame for this souveniring? Well, there's a chart of the nationalities that go to Chuuk, and a good percentage of them are US divers. I'm not saying the US divers are just to blame for the looting, but if you're a local person, you're earning sort of $50 a month, and you get offered $200 for one plate, what are you going to do? And it's not just to feed yourself, it's to feed your extended family. So you can sort of start to see maybe who really is to blame for the looting. And you can see evidence of it here, and I found these photographs from a colleague in Australia at the same place on the Shinkoku Maru, 78 and 2000, and how the artefacts are picked up, put there, and then gone through to see what's nice to sort of take away. We mentioned before the dynamite fishing, how divers will go up to the 55 metres to get those sea mines on San Francisco Maru. I've heard of stories of them running out of air at that depth, been down there for 24 minutes, but they'll go to big efforts to recover some of these bombs and the dynamite and make dynamite bombs. And you can see the fish, the photograph I took on Fujikawa Maru. There's some nice fish there for dinner. But they will make, in one bomb that they can throw or back on the wrecks or on the reef, they'll make about $2,000 from just one bomb for the fish that they catch and can sell. So there's a big incentive, from the looting and the dynamite fishing as an economic benefit for local people. This is the bridge of the Fujikawa Maru, and I think Diane Strong now says that bridge has collapsed. But that scarring and the loss of the corals would have come about from dynamite fishing. Also, and I'm not placing any sort of importance on this is a very important issue. The priority of this, but they are war graves. They're war graves for Japanese people, and they should be respected as such. Japanese people go there once a year and pay their respects to their fathers, grandfathers, their ancestors, and so on. Many Japanese people are not against the tourism there, but they would like some of the sites off limit where there still are some human remains. Many of them have been recovered and gone through ceremonies. They realise that the tourism on the shipwrecks is one of the few industries there is for Chuuk, so that they go along with the tourism on the shipwrecks. But you can see that there's a number of conflicts with the management, with the use of these sites, the historic significance, the war graves, the tourism, the dynamite fishing really don't sit comfortably together. And one researcher has called these sites pleasure grounds for tourism, which, as you know, as a war grave, you know, they're hardly pleasure sites, and I think this demeans their significance. There's no acknowledgement, as I said, to Chuuk's suffering during the war from the National Register nomination, and they attributed the blame, as I said, to Chuuk's for poor management and the looting. Just as a side note, which sort of adds up to this sort of atmosphere of you know, pushing the local people down, is that the war compensation. You know, Chuuk's applied for $1 billion. They received $10 million, and they were told to use that money to buy Japanese products. And the Chuuk's were not involved in any of these sort of negotiations in compensation. So it's a question I have: who is the loser here? Again, the other thing that we touched on is the oil leaking from the shipwrecks, and we've seen Vicky's talked a little bit about that. And a conservation specialist, Ian McLeod, who started working with me in 2002, predicted that these sites would sort of, in association with the impact of the dynamite fishing, the typhoons, that they might start to break up in 10 to 15 years. And they are starting to break up. Who's responsible for the oil? Chuuk's and other islanders? I mean, whose war was it? Whose ships are they? Again, local community lose out because it's something is not done, and oil is contained in the shipwrecks, and that's the big question: is there oil contained in the shipwrecks? The islands will be polluted, possibly destroying the fragile marine environment. The FSM president, Maury, I forget his first name, went to the United Nations headquarters and sort of stressed that they need help in cleaning up these ships in September 2011. And until recently, there was no action taken by the US or the Japanese, but now there are. We've just learned in the last couple of weeks that JMAS, a Japanese mine action group that are going around looking at surveying for unexploded ordnance, have got some money to go and look at what's happening in Chuuk. And we've just got some funding out of UNESCO to also look at the issue of the hazards that are the Chuuk sites, the shipwrecks pose, and some remedial action. So things are sort of happening there, albeit sort of slowly. Just moving on to Guam as a comparison, Guam put together a database of underwater cultural heritage sites from a desktop survey and found there to be 120 sites, and they range from the Lati period through to the present. So there's no, from the desktop survey, didn't find any pre-Lati sites underwater, and only one Lati period site. And the majority, well, not majority, but a great number of them are from the Spanish colonial period, the second being from the World War II period, with 24 sites. And these World War II sites range from these here, midget submarine, Kitsugawa Maru, and you can see a box of ammo still on the deck there, American tanker, and an aircraft, Japanese aircraft. Probably the most well-known and dived site is the Tokai and the Cormorant. World War I, the Cormorant, Tokai Maru, World War II, reputed to be the only place where these two vessels touch anywhere in the world. And The diving industry, and quite a bit of it is on World War II sites, is worth about $56 million to Guam. So it's a significant industry for Guam. Carly's mentioned a bit about the CBs and the site that we're working on with the field school. We've sort of gone back there. I just find it a really nice site for teaching and for exploring a whole number of issues. It's in 10 metres of water, tucked close into the breakwater inside Apra Harbour. So you could dive there in a typhoon, and it's a good site to take students to look at corrosion studies, to look at sort of photogrammetry, to look at sort of interpretation, a whole range of things. So when there are other sites that we could work on, but for teaching, I really like this site. Tractors, and can anyone guess what the top device is? We've found out recently what we think this is. It's a jig or a rig that the CBs, did you want to, no? They call it a coconut tree removal device for removing coconuts. So I'm not quite sure how it's used and why it's made like that, but an interesting object on the site. We looked at some time ago with the Guam Preservation Trust some funding to look at sort of an underwater heritage park there. I mean, we're looking at this area in a holistic way, so looking at the marine flora and fauna and the cultural material, and looking at it from a multivocal perspective. So looking at how many people would view the site. So looking at it from how Chamorro people would view it, how American and how Japanese people would view it. If you're a Chamorro person, you dive there, what would you see? You know, what would you think? What would the value be? So one thought we had was, why don't we introduce something like mannequins that you put in a museum to help, you know, get messages across. And to me, this sort of humanises the material a bit. But rather than have mannequins, why don't we get Chamorro people to design some artwork, to design some sculptures that we could put there. And this would maybe help to engage the visitors that go there, and that they would see the material in maybe slightly different, or in the multivocal perspectives. If they could see, you know, Chamorro artwork that was obviously Chamorro artwork, they could maybe get a feel for how the CB and the World War II impacted the Chamorro, and maybe had that interaction between Chamorro local people and the sea. And that's been a big part of life here for 3,500 years. So there is an underwater museum in Cancun in Mexico that has introduced these sculptures, and that's the, sorry for the layout there, but they see this underwater museum in Cancun as it says, a contemporary and cultural view of how the Mayan people, where they've done this in Mexico, have evolved throughout the years in this silent evolution. So, and particularly in terms of their relationship between man or women and persons and the sea. And my thought was, could Chamorro artists design something similarly appropriate, and how Chamorro people were impacted by the war at the CB site. So look at how that interaction between Chamorro people and the sea, and also the Chamorro people's perspective of this site and the war in general, could be born by these statues. So, just to go back to that one, underwater museums, or museums in general, are used to educate, inform, stimulate, and have people contemplate things like this museum here would be trying to do. And an underwater museum would be the same way. It would be looking at providing an opportunity for multiple stories to be told in association with authentic sites like the CB site in their original setting, the sea. And that's big. That's a part of the cultural identity of Guam, and that's evident from the Guam flag. There's the sea. I mean, there's the coast. There's the the coconut tree, the coconut tree removal device kept on wanting to take out the canoe. So there's a strong connection between local people and the sea, and it's a big part of the cultural identity of them. So to bring it back to managing underwater cultural heritage sites, how do we make it better or more relevant? And I think we make it better anyway by making it more relevant and beneficial to local people. And I think we diminish this neo-colonialism that's inherent in some in World War II tourism, where maybe 99% of World War II tourists are foreigners. I mean, how many local people can afford to dive if they're not paid for it as guides? So if we turn it around a little bit and have it encourage by introducing things that would encourage local people to come and look at a site like they would on land, maybe you could diminish this neo-colonialism in World War II tourism. And therefore we interpret the sites according to all the different values, the multivocal values, and particularly local values. And we stimulate the sort of research and studies of these sites from a local perspective. And I think that's how we can sort of better manage these sites for the Pacific, not just for Guam and Chuuk. So thank you very much.
Yeah, we have a question.
Okay. We can take a few questions if anybody has any. If anybody has any questions, okay.
Thank you. Bill, Bill, I was wondering if you could just briefly note if there's any methodology, to determine fuel in these wrecks. How would you find out?
I think that we can get a lot from historical research, and we've almost, I think, come to the conclusion there's not a lot of oil left from the historical research. Wakako Higuchi, who I haven't met but corresponded, she's done a lot of research on them, and she's found that they came in just before the bombing, and they were told to get rid of the oil out of those, and then they were sunk just after. And lots of little things that she picked up, where she picked up that two of the ships, it was reported that they were, not long after the bombing, they were leaking oil so much that all the oil was gone. And the dive guides, they used to tell me that when they first started diving, it was the smell of oil that led them to the sites. So if you have oil leaking, from 1944 through to 1970, through to 2017, and historical records suggest that they were pumped out, the oil was pumped out, there can't be a lot of oil left in them. I mean, we are seeing bits of them, probably about 10 of them, and now and again leaking bits of oil. But I don't know of anyone that I thought, is there some sort of scanner, like a scanning you can put on and you can look inside, whether it would pick up oil as a denser material or not. So I think that most of it's going to be done by historical research. But I'd be very happy to hear from anyone that knows how we can look inside and without drilling big holes and maybe putting a probe in something, maybe that. Yeah.
Bill, I'm just going to comment on, because when you talk, we've been going over this for years, especially with CVs in regards to local interaction, and it was just a comment that I heard a couple of days ago on K57 with Phil and Vince, Leo and Guerrero, and they made a point, because we just celebrated our liberation. What is it, 73? 73rd liberation, 73rd year, which started with a local lady who figured the one way to bring the local and military population together was to do a parade. She started with it. But Vince and Phil, the comment they made to me meant an awful lot, because for years we've politicized the Liberation Parade. Their comment was, it's time to stop politicizing this one event because of so many things that were involved in it. It's not a political event, it was an event that affected the entire island, and not just the island, but the region. And that the event of World War II, as far as we're concerned, and everything involved, belongs in its own vacuum and should be looked at that way from the archaeological, environmental, and economic point of view, where now it's time for us to go back and put the pieces together, because we are losing the Manamco who no longer will be able to tell us the stories. And if we don't put that together soon, we're going to lose the value and the information and the data critical from that period that actually has taught many of us, including myself, a lesson about the atrocities of war and how it affects a people when it occurs, along with everything else that occurs. Before my grandmother passed away many, many years ago, she wouldn't talk about it, but she had a very varied interpretation, especially if you talk to people from Agana about how the CBs interacted, whereas Agana was one way, and when the CBs came through, it was redesigned another. So, you know, we look at the park with the Serena, where that should have been a river that went all the way across from Manigua down to here, and there are still different interpretations of how that affected the population. But I think the thing is based on everything you've done and I've done with you, that little comment made a big difference for me, but it's time for us to look at the value. You were looking for the cultural value, and they made a point that this is not a political thing to be played with. This is a cultural community issue that needs to be recorded and saved, because we're going to lose it, man. Right now we're looking at everything that's been going on, and we are losing people who have that information. And if we don't get off our butts and start collecting it, we're in trouble. We will lose that lesson learned.
Yeah, I agree, Lewis. We've spent quite a bit of today talking about how we can protect, manage the objects, the sites, but we haven't talked much or at all about how we can, nurture or protect, the information that people have got, how we can maintain that, how we can keep it on, and there's a number of issues to do with that, but I think it's very important, especially here in the Pacific, that those stories, the objects are just the background to the stories. The stories are very important, and we need to focus a bit more, or a lot more, on those sort of stories. Did you have a...
Yes, I'm not a diver myself, but I'm just wondering, this junkyard, was this utilized as a dumping area, and what's the background behind this site?
And the CBs after the war, and Carly they'll probably tell you better than I could, but it was where the material was dumped after the war, and starting in the 40s, 45, 50s, and maybe up until more recent times, and tractors and anything that they didn't want to take back or couldn't use anymore, they just dumped them there. So there's 4 tractors, there's 10 of these big outboard motors they use for propelling pontoon or barges, there's an Amtrak that's squash flat, there's these huge pipes, there's radio masts, whatever. So it's an area of a few acres that's just been, where this material has been dumped, that the CBs used in, rebuilding Guam, I suppose, and in building the breakwater.
So I understand also that the Paseo area was a landfill. The Paseo area became a landfill, and that's how that extension happened?
Yeah, I don't know much about that, but I do know a little bit that someone else might be better talk about Diane or... But, yeah. You can see evidence around that breakwater of the church, I think, the original cathedral, can you? Or there's lots of other bits and pieces there that obviously they've just pushed out and made this sort of reclaim that sort of land.
Well, what's so sad is that entire Agana area was a thriving community, much like Sumai, And it virtually became a ghost town after the war, I guess, with all the destruction. It was never rebuilt, you know, the way it was pre-war. So, yeah, it's definitely a lot of major changes, and people had to relocate because all the homes were destroyed. The entire area was demolished.
And there are the stories that would be really important to record, as Lewis is saying, you know, before people pass on and we lose those stories, that sort of you know, living heritage. And these objects and the places are just the background to those sort of stories. So while we can protect the sites, you know, we need to emphasise and place a bit more, you know, push a bit more research, a bit more study on documenting these stories before they're lost.
To what extent have you as a maritime archaeologist or any of the archaeology community been engaged in conversations regarding the military buildup and what kind of an impact that might have on the historical, cultural sites underwater or the environment, the reef? Have you been engaged in any kind of discussions with that?
I haven't been engaged with.
No, I can. I can say something.
Okay.
Oh. Is this civilian?
No.
My question was just basically asking if Dr. Jeffery or any of the other individuals had been engaged in any kind of conversations about the environmental impact or the impact on the historic structures that might potentially be caused by the military buildup.
Thank you.
Yeah, at the time there was this gigantic environmental impact statement done that was covering the military buildup on Guam, including dredging a huge area of Opera Harbor to create a nuclear aircraft berthing base and turning base too. Yeah, the surveys done for the impacts were limited to the depths that they were going to dredge, or maybe slightly below that. Meanwhile, there's probably a lot of remains from World War II that are at the bottom deeper there that would be covered over with silt from the dredging and all that weren't really analyzed. And when we were reviewing the EIS, we complained about that. But meanwhile, they backed off of doing that harbor for the aircraft carrier. So it's kind of may come back, and it's worth looking into.
Under the EIA, or is it section 1010 or 108 of the National Historic Preservation Act, any federally funded project needs to involve an archaeological survey, so that would be underwater or not underwater, on land. Especially on land, they do that. Really not had anyone here until the last few years that we could do it underwater. But I haven't been involved in anything like that yet, but maybe we will in the future.
Okay.
Any more questions?
Can I just, before I just give a plug for the University of Guam, it was my dean, James Selwyn, who agreed when I gave him an email, said, could you pay for the lunch and the refreshments? And so it was the College of Liberal Studies and Social Sciences that paid for the refreshments and lunch here today. So,